afternoon, or evening. If you're watching the replay, it's morning where I am right now. I'll put my logo up just for a moment. It's kind of tiny up there in the corner, but that'll be okay. This morning, we're doing another scheduled shamanic coffee hour. I got my, it's actually not mine, Mama Bear. I love the Bears. Not the football team, although I'm indifferent about that. Gosh, my hair this morning. Um, Having a little coffee. I'm drinking Pete's Medium Roast, which has been my coffee of choice for pretty pretty much the past few months. Love it. Love Pete's coffee. I am not endorsed by Pete's, so I don't have to give a disclaimer there. I just happen to love their coffee. Um, Today we're going to talk about the shadow and shadow work for beginners. How do we get started working with our shadow? This is something, it's a really important topic to me. Um, when I went through my shamanic training, I went through apprenticeship and 2 years of initiatory training and 2 years of teacher training and a bunch of other training in between all of that. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Talking about the shadow this morning and shadow work. I'm a little hoarse. Could be spring. Folger's blonde silk for you. Oh, you like the blonde roasts or whatever you can find. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I live in New England, and in New England, Dunkin' Donuts is king. Like, I used to live where I used to live outside of Boston. There were 6 Dunkin' Donuts within a quarter mile of my house, which gives you a little bit of an idea about the New England obsession for Dunkin' Donuts. Way more so than Starbucks or anybody else is Dunkin' Donuts. And other coffee companies sometimes try to come in and just can't compete with, like we had Krispy Kreme came in and then folded and left. But Dunkin' is always there. But I don't love their coffee, but and I realize that's sacrilegious for a New Englander to say they don't love Dunkin' Donuts coffee, but in a pinch, I will have some. So anyway, I'm drinking a big cup in a Mama Bear mug. I had a Papa Bear mug, but had to get rid of it. It got old and kind of worn out. Um, Big on the bear stuff. So anyway, today, good morning, everyone, or whatever time of day it is when you're watching this. I'm going to talk today about the shadow. I'm a little hoarse. If you can tell, I've been doing a lot of stuff. And I was up the other night teaching kind of late for me. I gave a class at 8:30, starting at 8:30. So, and there was a lot of talking in there. I should be more careful with my voice, I guess, but that's okay because I can talk and I will get the stuff. Machu Picchu, super awesome name and flavor. Yeah, I like the name Machu Picchu. Um, every once in a while, if I'm feeling a little rich, there's I think it's called Mountain Coffee. It's pure Kona coffee. It's about 50 to $60 for a pound of it. Don't Maybe once a year I'll order some as like a gift to myself. I can't necessarily justify spending that much on coffee, but it is something else to drink. A lot of stuff that's labeled as Kona coffee is only, like 10% Kona coffee because Kona coffee is very expensive. You can't, like, if you see a bag of Kona coffee in the grocery store for, uh, you know, $12, that's not real Kona coffee, or it has so little Kona coffee in it that it's a blend of other stuff. If I sound like a bit of a coffee snob, I'm not a coffee snob, I don't think, but I love coffee and I do enjoy good coffee, so good coffee is really important. Anyway, so I've been teaching a lot of stuff about spiritual development, spiritual awakening, spiritual practice. And this morning I want to get into the shadow, talk about what it is, talk a little bit about how we might begin to do some shadow work on our own if you don't have a healer or a teacher that you're working with directly. Even a lot of therapists, Jungian informed therapists, will work with shadow material. So the shadow, as the concept that we're going to be working with today, the term the shadow was coined by psychoanalyst Carl Jung in the early 20th century, and he termed that he coined that term, uh, describing the exiled and unconscious parts of ourselves. So the shadow is not something that is external in spiritual reality. Nothing's external anyway. But it's not. This is not some demon that's coming in and attacking us. It's part of us. But it's exiled parts of us. What do I mean by that? Well, there are parts of us and one of the things that he gave rise to, that Jung gave rise to, is what we call parts therapy. I have all these different parts. If you've ever behaved in a way that, even without the addition of alcohol or other substances, if you ever behaved in a way and said, "What was I thinking? Why did I do that?" Okay. Is it sort of a different part of yourself may have taken over? Where does that part live? Well, if you're unconscious of that part, it lives in your shadow, which is the complex of hidden desires, hidden behaviors, hidden values, hidden all kinds of stuff, hidden wounds, hidden traumas, stuff that we don't want to look at because it's either too painful to look at, which is why we repress a lot of stuff, or we've been told this part of us is socially unacceptable, will get us excluded, we're not good people if we have these things about us, right? um think about there's a lot of pushback against the LGBTQ plus community right now from certain political wings. I don't think that's going to go very far because the ship into acceptance, in at least in the culture that I live within, has sailed, and people look like very backwards and whatever. But growing up, um, being in the closet was a serious thing. It was very dangerous to come out as gay or anything else other than straight, cisgendered, whatever. It was very dangerous. There's a very famous case here in Maine where a young man was killed because he was gay, and it actually gave rise to some of the material that Stephen King used in his in the It series. If you've watched about this demonic clown, but there's um, there's themes and stuff running through some of Stephen King's work about this. He was so shaken up by this. It happened when I was a boy, teenager. Very shocking stuff. So a lot of people, were in the closet, but then a lot of people to this day will still hide parts of themselves. If you live in a family where you can be excluded for who you are, for how you feel, that sort of thing, you're going to exile those parts of yourself because it's safer to do that. It's safer. And a lot of people struggle with this. So it does carry our hidden desires. It could be anything. It could be sexual desires that you have, that your spirituality or your upbringing or the culture tells you um are make you a bad person, right? It could be um it could be other desires. It could be simple desires. Things like, I always wanted to play the piano, but my family always told me that I had no musical talent. So it was really painful for me to look at that. Oh, I really want to do that, but I'm going to be rejected by my family. If I do, I'm going to throw that into my black bag. Poet Robert Bly described the shadow as a long black bag that we drag along behind us, has all of those exiled parts. It also will carry our wounds, our psychic, spiritual wounds, our emotional wounds, that sort of thing. Stuff that it is painful to go through again. It's hidden away from us. We don't want to look at that stuff again. So, one of the things that Jung said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, he said, you don't become enlightened by seeking more light. You become enlightened by diving down into the dark and looking at these things and pulling these things up. And the first part of doing shadow work is just to start to become aware of what's there. And I'm going to give you some ways to do that today, to begin the shadow work, right? It's to make the unconscious parts conscious. Oh, by the way, I should add, I see that somebody has tuned in on Twitch. Hello, if you're on Twitch. This is my first. This broadcast goes out to YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now Twitch. This is my first day on Twitch. So if you're tuning in from Twitch, hello and welcome. This is my very first thing on Twitch. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. So the first part of integrating these parts, and why do we want to integrate our shadow parts? Why do we want to work with them? Why do I even need to, I threw them back in the shadow. I don't want to look at this stuff anymore. I don't want to know what's there. Well, the problem with the shadow is that nothing ever quite stays there. These things are affecting you. They are a part of you. And again, if you've ever had one of those experiences where you did something and then afterwards went, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Why did I do that? Or if you have addictions that you're trying to kick, if you have emotional reactivity that's out of control, if you're emotionally dysregulated, sometimes if you have things like PTSD, depression, anxiety, there are things in your shadow that are holding those in place. And so doing shadow work is a really important part of our personal development and also our spiritual development. Now, you might think there's this thought sometimes that if I recognize the parts of me that are in my shadow, oh, I really want to punch that guy in the nose from cutting me off in traffic. But I can't be like that because I'm a spiritual person. I can't have that impulse. I can't have that thought because I'm a spiritual person. Push that back, push that back. There's two things that's happening here. One is something called spiritual bypassing, which is this: I'm too spiritual. It's you remember that song, I'm too sexy for my shirt. I'm too spiritual for this hurt. I don't know, I'm trying to rhyme it. I'm too spiritual for this feeling. I don't feel this. I'm floating above all of this. Spiritual bypassing, right? Spirituality doesn't say don't feel your feelings. In fact, true spirituality says dive into those feelings and allow them to pass out of you the way that they want to, allow them to move through you without being attached to them. Anything that's in your shadow is kind of locked in place until you start to make it conscious. And the things that are in your shadow will run your life from behind the scenes. They'll influence your life from behind the scenes. They are responsible for all of the things that we're like that we don't necessarily like about ourselves, or that we wish were different, or that sort of thing. They're responsible for holding us back from pursuing our dreams. Okay. So doing shadow work will improve your life in big ways, emotionally, relationship wise. If you ever have been in a relationship with somebody, not just romantic relationship, but work relationship, friend relationship, family relationship, where somebody is able to push your buttons, where you're getting triggered and reactive, it's because there's stuff in your shadow that's about that. So, bringing that up and making friends with that. Now, the stuff in your shadow has been exiled. You can't kill it off. You can try to fight with it, but that's ultimately a mistake. These things that are in your shadow are allies. They're there for a good reason. They just might not be doing things well or the way that you would like, right? If you had a friend and he said, "Let me come help you mow your lawn," and you're like, "Okay, that's really wonderful. Thank you for offering to mow my lawn." And he came over and he asked to borrow your razor, your electric razor, and he was going to go out on your lawn. And you know, that friend is not trying to harm you. He's just going about helping you in a way you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Okay. Let me show you how to use a lawnmower if you want to help me out. And that will be fantastic. Now I've got this ally who's being really helpful. It's the same thing with your shadow parts. They all have good intentions for you. Most of them are there as protective mechanisms. Our inner wounds, our wounding, the way that we react from our wounding. So let's say, I get reactive when somebody cuts me off in traffic. I fly into a rage. And then I think about it and I'm like, well, that's just ridiculous. It's just a part of traffic. Why am I flying into a rage? Why is this overreaction happening? Well, there's some part of you in your shadow, if you don't know why it's happening, there's some part of you in your shadow that is acting protectively. That anger, that rage, that feeling that rises up is coming from a protective mechanism, a mechanism that wants to keep you safe. That person cut me off. They could have killed me, right? Is the thing that it's thinking. It's a part of you. It's like a little part of yourself back here. The other thing about stuff in the shadow, if we don't integrate, if we don't work with it, is that these tend to be parts of ourselves that are locked into time. They don't evolve unless you work with them. So imagine a version of you from when you were 5 trying to negotiate the adult world. And a lot of our shadow parts get locked in. A lot of our survival responses get locked in when we're little. And a lot of our stuff gets socialized out of us, right? Um, But sometimes when we're little, we're forced into situations where we have to find the best survival mechanism, which might be hiding or fawning or, you know, freezing up or whatever it is. And we get locked into those patterns that come out as adults. Our mind goes, find some reference, find some way to deal with the situation. Somebody cuts me off in traffic. I'm going to throw a temper tantrum, right? Road rage. So it's amazing how people can change in the car, right? How getting into a car, all of a sudden we're separated from that other person by a little bit. They can't necessarily hear us or whatever. Um, sometimes, sometimes we, behave really differently. It's interesting. So we want to start to work with our shadow parts. We have to know what they are. We have to start, and just knowing what they are starts to process them, starts to integrate them, being able to converse with them, understand what's going on. So your shadow will, or parts of you will tell you, if I touched on this before, if I start integrating, if I bring these parts up of myself, maybe I'll become a serial killer, or maybe I will cheat on my spouse if I live out my hidden sexual desires, or maybe yada yada yada, I'll become this, I'll become that. None of that's true, right? That's the fear that's holding stuff still in the shadow. Maybe I'll be rejected by society, maybe, whatever. No, that's not going to happen. Why? Because you still have your intellect. You have grown, you have learned, you're not locked in time. You're not going to lose control. Okay. If something comes up, that is a hidden desire that, oh man, I really would love to rob that bank or something. I don't know. Whatever that would get you into trouble, you're not going to do it. You're not going to become stupid or unethical or any of those things. You're gonna say, where does that desire, where did that hidden desire? Oh, look at that bank. Wish I could go grab the money from behind the counter and take off. Where does that hidden desire come from? Where? That gives you an opportunity to start to explore maybe some feelings of not having enough or, whatever it is. Where does this hidden desire come from? Where does this wounding happen that causes me to be so reactive? I don't want to go through life reactive. I want to go through life thinking about and responding to things rather than reacting. We don't always make fantastic choices when we're in reactive mode, do we? So, have another sip of coffee. This is literally shamanic coffee hour. Okay, I always have coffee during these things, or most of the time I have coffee during these things. Um, so feel free to join me if you have a beverage that you enjoy. Doesn't have to be coffee. Um, and you don't have to drink a beverage. I'm not offended. So, how do we start to become aware? So, this is where the shadow work for beginners comes in, where I want to talk about how do we start to work with our shadow? Because there's some very, very, very advanced shadow work practices that come out of things like shamanism, for example. And you have to have you have to have quite a background, quite a level of experience before you can get to that sort of work. It's some of the most powerful work I've done, personal self-development work I've done. So, how do we begin to do that if we aren't, an experienced shamanic practitioner or, whatever, we don't have a PhD in psychology with a focus on psychoanalysis. What do we do? How do we work on that? How do we begin? You don't need any of that to begin. And like I said, the first part is just to start to become aware of that you have a shadow. We all have a shadow. If you think I don't have a shadow, well, that's because it's your shadow and you haven't started to look at stuff. We all have that. You cannot have grown up in a culture, in a society, in a family. Maybe you were raised by wolves and have no shadow. I don't know. If you have, let me know. That'd be interesting. We'll have an interview here. I'd love to interview somebody raised by wolves. Um, so the first section, the first part, the first thing you can do is to become aware of what's in your shadow. And how do we do that? I'm going to give you some ways to become aware of your own shadow material. The first thing, this was an assignment that a teacher gave me, uh, when I was in training one summer years ago. And I thought this was really good. And I've passed this on to quite a few people. And that is to keep a record. It could be a journal, could be electronic, doesn't matter, but keep a record, keep a trigger journal. Anytime you become emotionally reactive, fly off the handle in some surprising way or whatever, you have been triggered. That's what we mean by trigger. Trigger, there are trigger warnings for certain things. Sometimes we have an understanding of the stuff that triggers us, right? I know people with certain traumatic backgrounds that know where that trauma came from and know the things that re-trigger that trauma, right? So that part of it is not as much in the shadow, although if they're still being triggered by it, there's some unprocessed trauma there. But anytime we're triggered, and I know you might say, well, I never get triggered. Well, pay attention to when you get emotionally reactive to situations. And you might not just be paying attention, but write them down. Write down the day and the time, what you were doing, what happened, and what your response was. And that's it. Just write those things down. What happens when we start to journal things, when we start to write things down, is that it teaches our brain to pay attention to them. So if you want to remember your dreams, for example, if you don't remember your dreams, you start keeping a dream journal beside your bed and writing your dream down right when you wake up and first thing in the morning. When you do that, you're training yourself, you're conditioning yourself. Oh, this is important. I want to pay attention to this. I want to remember this. Okay. So it's the same thing with our triggers. We want to start to remember them so that we can process them. This isn't to say you're going to be able to say, look, I kept this trigger journal for a month, and every time my coworker came in and put country music on the radio, I was, you know, like I felt like my skin was crawling. You might not be able to trace that back to where the origin of that thing or whatever. And that's not all that important, right? Just starting to become aware of this stuff and teaching your brain, pay attention to this, pay attention to when this happens, right? Because it's important. We'll start to begin to process some of this shadow material. So keep a trigger journal. It's number one. Number two, one of the things we do because we have shadow material is we project. We project our crap onto other people all the time. We're not even aware that we're doing it. But we all do it, right? I see that person and like, oh, look at what they're wearing, look at how they have their hair, look at that. That is, our judgments of other people are tend to be projections, unless somebody's actually harming us. Somebody's not robbing me or punching me in the face or something. Just something about their existence is disturbing to me, or there's some pet peeve, or whatever. What is it that's causing my emotional reaction to this person? And then I'm projecting stuff onto them. Look at him, he's lazy. Look at him, he's any judgmental label that you have for other people is about some part of you that is uncomfortable very frequently because it resembles what's what you're perceiving over there. In fact, some people say perception is projection. I can't even experience you without looking through the filter of myself, right? So the stuff that drives us crazy about other people that isn't actually, we can't actually say that's harming me. You know, this is harmful to me. I had I had a thing, probably still do for to some extent, although I've loosened up because I know where it comes from, about people being late, people showing up when I'm waiting for them extremely late. And it was about not placing importance on me as the other person. Some people are chronically late. There was a friend of a friend, and we were always waiting for her. Sometimes she'd be 2 hours late to something. We're supposed to go to dinner together, and I'm starving, and it would drive me crazy because it was very inconsiderate. I mean, that's a judgment, but it was she was not considering anybody else and just did whatever. It wasn't it literally not inconsiderate, like wasn't thinking about, oh, maybe people are hungry and I shouldn't show up 2 hours late to dinner. And it would drive me nuts. And like, why? I mean, I get it, it's inconvenient. She's actually, not thinking about me, but there are other people around who are like, oh, that's just her. She's always late for everything, who weren't getting so worked up about it. And really, for me, it was about not being shown consideration, not being considered important. Probably some stuff about going hungry at one point in my life. There were definitely times in my life where I was extremely poor and went hungry, and so a lot of that stuff was getting pulled up for me out of my unconscious. So doing some work there kind of led to where that came from. You don't have to you do not have to relive any traumas. If you're doing this work and traumas come up for you in some way by a flashback or dreams or whatever, and you feel like you're becoming emotionally overwhelmed by that, um, my advice to you is to seek trauma informed therapy. If you have a history of trauma, trauma informed therapy is a really good idea anyway. But if any kind of shadow work or any kind of spiritual work, even in meditation, this can happen. Meditation, if you're doing meditation deeply and for a long period of time, longer than say a half an hour to 45 minutes, if you're meditating for an hour over time, an hour a day for a month or something, um, unconscious material will start to come up because you're starting to undo conditioning. You're turning off the part of your brain that stays busy when you're not when you're not meditating, called the default mode network. And it opens up space where it had been blocking things out, so stuff can come up. And if that happens to you, I really suggest seeking out a licensed therapist or psychologist or whatever to work through some of that trauma. But this can be an opening for that. If that happens to you, it can be an opening for working through some of that trauma. And um, it really can change your life for the better, can really help you live a happier, more peaceful life to process this stuff. So, um, so you may have some things come up for you once you start recognizing what's in your shadow. Your brain might go, oh, let's bring more, like that felt good to process this shadow material, let's bring up some more stuff. So just be aware of that and try to hold yourself non-judgmentally, right? Understand that because you have hidden, repressed stuff, we all do, it doesn't make you a bad person. Even if you would judge, let me think of something. Like I have, a hidden desire to punch my neighbor. My neighbor was out. I don't want to punch my neighbor. Not even a hidden desire, but um, raised my anxiety a little bit because my neighbor decided to go out and fire a very loud rifle in his backyard for a couple of hours the other day. And there's nothing I can do about it. There's no ordinance or anything like that. Um, so I know for me, I'm like, oh, somebody's firing a gun really close to my house. That is, it's producing anxiety, whatever. Um, but let's say that surfaces, I sit with that feeling, that anxiety feeling. I just sit with it and I hold it non-judgmentally. And a thought arises, man, I'd like to punch that guy in the nose for firing his rifle behind his house. That thought, that impulse, that feeling, that thing rising out of the shadow, that doesn't make you a bad person. What would make me a bad person is if I walked out the door and I went over and I punched the neighbor in the nose. But I'm not going to do that because I have ethics and I have a brain and I have, no good will come from that. And going over and harming somebody because they annoy me is not justified. And, um, all of those things. So don't think, the more you can sit with yourself non judgmentally, right? The more you can allow those things to come up and go, oh, there was an impulse to do that, neither good nor bad. And in fact, the impulse has a good intention. Everything everything you have has a good intention. Whether or not, again, it's like the neighbor trying to mow your lawn with your electric razor. He's got a good intention. He's not going about what he's doing the correct way. So I didn't have this feeling, but going back to this example of wanting to go punch this guy in the nose, what is oh well, having a really loud gun fired so close to my house brings up a feeling of being unsafe for me, right? And so the part of me that is responding to that is responding to a need for safety. It's protective. It's trying to keep me safe. It doesn't mean I become less intelligent or less ethical or any of those things. Surfacing those things doesn't do that. Repressing those things does. What happens, particularly in spirituality, if people don't do their shadow work? And people will think, oh, if I do my spiritual development work, if I become enlightened, ascended, yada, 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 I don't have to worry about my shadow. And that's just not true. Um, and I have personal experience with this, but you'll see gurus and spiritual teachers and leaders of ashrams and all these people who have a very high level of spiritual development, a very, may even experience complete non-duality and all kinds of stuff. They might be spiritually awake, and some of them, you can believe me or not, can even demonstrate supernatural abilities called siddhas in Sanskrit. I have seen this, witnessed this, been with other people around somebody, people. I've witnessed a lot of stuff in my life, but somebody who could do things that you wouldn't even imagine, could demonstrate, stuff that you think of in comic books and or movies, but not part of physical reality. Guy could really just bend reality to his will in front of your eyes. And that person wound up taking his own life a few years later. So you might think, well, geez, how can somebody that level of spiritual understanding and that intimate connection with physical reality, who could manifest whatever he wanted, bend reality to his will, really, right? Like you could see what he was doing, um, in ways that people only write about in mythologies and all these things. And this person who's considered an enlightened master by many people, why would he do that? Why would he take his own life? Well, because he was hurting, because he hadn't surpassed that. He hadn't cleaned up his shadow. There was an impulse to protect him from whatever was going on that was so strong that he took his own life. It was a shock to me when that happened. It was a shock to many people when that happened. I've known other spiritual teachers who wound up, essentially drinking themselves to death. I know we've read about other spiritual teachers who get in trouble for sexually abusing their followers or, stealing or doing really bad things. Why? Why wouldn't an enlightened being do that? Because I think my theory, a lot of these people are seekers. They're attainers. They are people who can go out and attain so much. It's a very masculine form of spirituality. Attainment, 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 ascension, enlightenment, yada, yada, yada. But they never go back and do their own work. Not only that, but they think they're above doing their own work. They're above cleaning that up. Even when they have levels of spiritual awakening where they're experiencing the whole universe simultaneously. And the thing is, a lot of that stuff is held in the body mind, which you don't, when you go through spiritual awakening, you might not identify as this body mind, but you still have this body mind. This body mind is still functional, it's still doing stuff. You don't feel like you're the doer, but this body mind is still doing stuff. Well, this body mind is holding on to that stuff in the shadow, even if you're not identifying with it. So, doing the cleanup work helps. Not only that, but doing the cleanup work will help towards spiritual awakening as well, because you're undoing a lot of your old conditioning that tells you that you're a separate being, you're imperfect, your body is bad, you should feel shame, your sexuality is wrong, you're not smart, you're all of this stuff that we've been conditioned to think is back there, and none of it's true. They're stories, they're myths, they're all of this stuff. So clearing that stuff up can lift a block on our pathway to spiritual awakening, spiritual realization. Um, I'd love to hear if anybody has questions about what I've talked about so far about the shadow, anything like that. If you are on, I don't know about, I don't know about any of the other channels, but if you are on YouTube or Facebook, I think I will see comments that will come up here, and they'll pop up in the corner. So obviously, don't comment anything that you don't want people to see on video. But if anybody has any questions about anything or wants to talk about anything at all, but happen to be talking about this shadow at the moment, be happy to discuss it, or just sit here and drink coffee together. But I hope that has been helpful in talking and thinking about the shadow, and um, as part of our spiritual journey. So, if you haven't read any of his stuff, I really like Ken Wilber. You can read him, you can catch him on, you catch videos of him. He I think offers courses, all kinds of stuff. I don't know how to describe Ken Wilber other than he is a um, very prolific modern philosopher. I don't know how he describes himself. He's a teacher. He writes. Um, but he writes about literally about everything there is, and he has this huge kind of nerdy model about and what he calls integral, and how there's lines and levels and layers, and this model is can be applied to anything, can be applied to spirituality, can be applied to the way that you pave roads, I guess. Whatever can be applied to everything, physical reality, politics, all this stuff. And but anyway, in he's written a lot about spirituality, Ken Wilber, and I like what he's written. I like his stuff. He talks a lot about divine masculine, divine feminine, things that are is this I think you mean similar to inner child work? Similar, yeah. Yeah, in fact, it absolutely is similar to inner child work. I would say that the inner child, until you become aware of it, it's inner child work comes out of parts therapy, which comes from Jung originally. So these are all branches of the same tree, if that's a good way to describe it. But for sure, that is you'll see similarities to this in inner child work. Any sort of parts therapy. There's also something called internal family systems, um, which I have not ever participated in, but I've read lots of things about, and it seems like an approach that could be incredibly useful. It's about dealing with all of these parts of ourselves and integrating them and working out the relationships between them. So I might have a part that is very nurturing, and I might have a part that is, angry and protective. And how do I get those things to work together in a way that is not trying to eliminate my parts? We're not trying to do that. We're trying to make our parts feel whole, make our parts feel respected, make our parts feel like they have what they need. So the shadow process that I was taught by my shamanic teacher comes from a Tibetan practice. It comes from a Tibetan practice called Chud, CHO with umlaut over the OD. Um, which there's a really interesting book about this practice out called Feeding Your Demons. And one of the interesting and I promise this is related to talking about parts therapy and inner child work. One of the interesting concepts from this field, from this work, from this type of work, is that uh, we have demons. They're not external. These demons, are parts of ourselves. There's this um, old expression in English, the devil made him do it, or the devil made me do it. Is when I do something and I don't really know why. Oh, the devil, I do something quote unquote bad and I don't really know why. Oh, the devil made me do it. Um, it's much more comfortable to think that there are external forces that are responsible for our bad behavior, the behavior that we judge as bad, than it is to take responsibility for that. But really, these parts that are making us do things, unless you're actually possessed by a spirit, and I haven't, I have worked with, I've worked with possession and possessing beings and people who had spiritual attachments and all of these things, and I have never experienced the level where people are like going out and robbing banks because there's a demon inside them or something. That's 99.9% of the time, probably more than that. That's something in us. That's a demon that's a part of us. We'd label it a demon. Demon is just a Greek word that means spirit. It wasn't until Christianity took over the pagan regions of Greece and Rome that the word demon became associated with fallen angels and evil spirits and stuff. But people used to have a house demon spirit that lived in your house, sort of like the house elf from Harry Potter. Um, and there were good demons, there were helpful demons, not good and bad, but helpful and harmful. Right? They're just spirits, demons. And everybody has, uh, going too far down the Greek spirit, the pagan Greek pagan spirituality pathway. But we all have sort of this holy guardian spirit as well, the genius demon. Um, but the word demon took on obviously a sinister tone when paganism was repressed throughout the ancient world. But anyway, off we're off on tangents today. Maybe I've had too much coffee, maybe I haven't had enough coffee today, but full of tangents. So I hope that answered your question about, is this similar to inner child work? They're very similar, very similar to that. And they're all coming from basically parts therapy, the understanding that we have complexes, which are, gathered up parts of ourselves, um, and things like that. And that all comes from Jungian psychology, though these practices, feeding your demon, chud, all of this stuff. Um, Shamans have been working with shadow aspects for thousands of years, probably, maybe longer, before we had records. You're very welcome. Um, Shamans have been working with this stuff forever. It's just we didn't have, I think, a Muppet Treasure Island. The eagle tells Gonzo that the captain is tortured by inner demons. Gonzo replies, "He has demons? Cool." I don't know if I ever saw Muppet Treasure Island. I think, isn't that the one with Tim Curry? I probably should see it. I'm a big fan of Tim Curry. Speaking of demons, I remember he played the devil in Legend, I think was the name of the movie, where he had the giant horns, the horns that were like 3 feet tall or something. I should look up and see how long it took to put that makeup on and how heavy those horns were. I guess he wasn't the actual devil; he was some kind of demon. But but Tim Curry, big fan. I'll have to watch Muppet Treasure Island at some point. I'm sure it's on Disney Plus or something. But Yeah, that's exactly it. When somebody says he's tortured by inner demons, that's these are parts of ourselves, and frequently parts that are in our shadow that we have repressed, but they're acting up, right? They're acting up in a way that protects us or makes us, I mean, it's all protective. Everything, all of this unconscious activity, might seem weird, is all about um, protection. Even our strange sexual impulses. I mean, what we deem as strange. I don't judge. I'm a sex positive spiritual teacher. Any activity that is consensual is fine. Um, but the things that we say, wow, that's really weird. Why do I, have this unusual sexual desire, unusual for you, whatever is something that you deem, if it's something that you deem as weird, but you're like, oh, I really, in the back of my mind, I have some desire for that. That's a part of you. That's a hidden part of you. And there is something there. And always, when I say protective, it can be really tough to see, like, how would that protect me? Right? But if you think about human impulses and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So being protected just means in this case having your needs met, having some sort of needs met, and that includes needs for esteem and connection and feeling loved. All of those things. You have to have your physical needs met first, your needs for physical safety, the bottom of Maslow's pyramid. Now, at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, which most people, if you took a psychology class at any point, you most likely learned, or even if you didn't, you probably understand, it's this pyramid that says you got to meet these needs first, and then these, then these, then these. So the first needs we have as human beings are physical needs. Oh, yeah. I had well, yeah, so I'm part of, Neurodivergent Nation, and I've, diagnosed with ADHD, so I can get off topic very easily. Um, so no lesson plan ever meets the when I teach something a little more structured, like, if I'm teaching a course in shamanism, I actually have an outline that I go by. It's the only thing that keeps me on track. Today, coffee hour, no outline. Very free form, very free form. So, but I was talking about Maslow's hierarchy and how we have to have our needs met. And if our needs aren't met at any level, that can feel like a threat to us. If we don't feel loved or appreciated, we don't feel esteem, that at some level can feel like an existential threat. Um, why? Because humans are tribal, because we relied on our parents loving us and feeding us to survive, because we rely on being part of a tribe, or we did at least, um, early on in human evolution to survive. If humans did not hunt cooperatively and gather cooperatively, we would not have survived as a species. So all of those things, social acceptance, and again, some people are very introverted and don't need that as much. Some people are extroverted and need it a whole lot. Our needs are all a little bit different, but they follow the same patterns. So when our needs aren't met and we feel unsafe, sometimes that can create complexes for us in our shadow. So um, food food has been an issue for me throughout my life, as it has for many people. There were times, uh I don't know, some stuff stemmed from childhood, clearly, that I'm not even aware of yet, but also as a very young adult, I went through a time of extreme poverty where I went hungry for a period of time. And so food is a real, like, I know there's like these deeper survival connections that go beyond reason. Obviously, we know we have to eat to survive, but it goes like, there's a deeper feeling to that. And I know part of where that comes from. So at the upper level, and there's an interesting thing about Maslow because he revised his pyramid before he died, but it was never published. Um, but at the very top of the pyramid that most of us is are familiar with or were taught in school is something called self-actualization, which is about integration. It is about integrating the parts of the selves to become activated, awoke, that sort of thing. But his revision that's sort of unpublished, some people know about it because they have his notes and everything. But above that, above self-actualization is self-transcendence, right? And this is getting more into the spiritual realm of things, although self-actualization is pretty spiritual. But self-transcendence, and this is about really transcending the self, transcending the little s self, and identifying more with the big S self. So anyway, that is the shadow and many other topics, but the shadow, some shadow work for beginners. If you missed when I talked about that, you can go watch. And this is recorded and available everywhere. Available on YouTube and Facebook and I guess Twitch and Instagram and Twitter, I think. But I'm trying to be everywhere, trying to have this body mind show up everywhere at one time, and I haven't mastered spiritual bilocation yet, but working on it so I can teach in multiple locations at one time. Anyway, I'm going to end for the day. Been talking for an hour. And thank you all again for joining me, especially my folks who are repeat viewers. Thank you for coming back and chatting with me, and thank you for tuning in to Twitch. If you tuned in there, my very first thing ever broadcasting on Twitch, so brand new to the platform. So if you are not, don't forget to subscribe or like it. You're very welcome. Have a good day yourself. Love you all, and